Okay, so it's official. The YouTube Capture app that I've been using to upload my videos no longer works with iOS 11. So I'm going to take this opportunity to be really non-linear and talk on audio and catch up on some of the things that I wanted to talk about. I have a ton of things that I haven't talked about on video or audio yet, most of which I wrote down in California, and I've been attempting to get a little bit more linear lately and thinking a little bit about starting a business, but I feel like I have to remember that when I'm applying for this business course, I'm writing that I'm going to create some kind of online course, mainly to get into the business class. If all else fails and I'm unable to get linear with this, what I really want to do is share this conversation and process along the way. And a lot of it is getting in connection with a voice that speaks from a different place than memory. So to try to create a linear structure is accessing memory in order to speak. So I'm not sure about that. And I don't want to sit and wait for a month and a half for that course to start and forget about this non-linear process, which is kind of the point. At least I feel that way right now. So I might talk about some other things and see how that goes and put it on audio, as now I don't have access to YouTube Capture. So I have to limit my videos to 15 minutes. So I think I'll save those for when I'm out and about. But right now, I'm going to talk to myself about very random things that I wrote before. And this acknowledges the process of this energy and how it has random things to say that aren't necessarily linear, logical, directly connected to the personal self. Can we go from a protective bubble of context and meaning, which is something I've created for myself, to a creative bubble of embodied action? And hopefully along the way in this dialogue with myself, I'm passively informing people of other options and sharing the dream and making it a reality and moving into creating with our possibility. And do we need to make meaning apart from the creative action itself once it's integrated? And that's something I'm wondering about myself. So perhaps by speaking the last of this huge accumulation of insights, it would be great to move on to sharing creative action and not necessarily sharing meaning apart from the moment. And that would be something like a live video. And I do that sometimes now, but it would be good to move into that more so, and moving into non-accumulative perception action. And that's part of what I want to design into the trip, is non-accumulative perception action. So hopefully when I leave on my trip mid-February of next year, I can move deeply into non-accumulative perception action. Because right now I have this accumulation of insights. I have an accumulation of something written down as ideas for the business, and I've talked about creating a course, but when it comes down to it, I want to share this dialogue with myself, take off on a trip, and maybe have some affiliate links or possibilities of consultation calls with me as a way to fund some of this, but not really as the main thing. And again, I'm delaying sharing because I need to make it to 9 months without a spiritual emergence type crisis, being on no medications, just micronutrients. And I made a note to myself to create an automatic text response when I'm in flow that says, In flow will text back when flow no mo. Because sometimes one is in a creative flow and somebody maybe knows that one isn't at work or one isn't busy per se, but one is busy. One is lost in the creative non-self process. Virtual reality is an extension of our consensus reality as a sensory deprivation tank. We have to augment the senses that are overemphasized by creating virtual reality. We're missing out on what's actually already here, and we can't even see it. And since we can't see it and interact with it, it dries up, and so do the congruent structures in the brain. We need to engage with actuality. There's a video by Krishnamurti titled Learning That Transforms Consciousness. And in a way, it is a profound argument against overemphasis on virtual reality. And map consciousness also shows us this. Is there a totally different way of living? Is there a totally different way of looking? What am I learning from my own being? A heuristic is to learn from your own being. Is this heuristic dialogue? The book Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler mentions certain brain chemistry being subversive. And they already see certain brain chemistry as subversive. Hence they fluoridate the water, which damages the pineal gland. Map consciousness is a superhuman state. It's our superhuman blueprint. Let the moment make meaning out of you. I talk a lot about making meaning out of the moment, but let it make meaning out of us. Let it move us and gesture us. Can we have a sense of the moment instead of a sense of self? The sense of self is the sense of the past. Can we speak from our sense of the moment? Again, I'm translating the random bits that I've written down into audio because that's what I was doing before and I've gotten away from it. And I was thinking that maybe one day I could put some of this into a book or something, but I don't know. I'm not sure about this attempt to get linear. Perhaps the only linearity I want to engage in is the minimum required to understand the linear structure of a business. But sharing, speaking from a non-linear place and not making attempts to make it linear. So I'll keep reading random bits. Expand, learn, experience, flow. Harvest, extract, extrapolate. Embody, integrate, daily life. This is my thing to help other people. Now I can get back to taking care of my body with healthy food and working in this realm. There is not a mind to take care of or analyze. I had to analyze and talk my way out of making any other analysis or meaning. Map consciousness changes the context, so everything looks different to us. We are seeing from a different context, different assumptions and meanings. What are those? Can we act as if we still see that way? That we are connected? There is a different universal context that is different than our conditioned personal assumptions. We assume we have a self. Non-volition is suspending programmed volition. In map consciousness, our main assumption is not to assume anything. We generally tend to avoid psychological uncertainty, and this helps to create the me, which is consistency and continuity and separation, acting separately from our own volition. The moment creates the meaning. That is the only place meaning can be, but we inject old meaning, thus blocking momentary meaning from arising so that we can taste it. We have to wait for the speed of sounds. Planck length has a new meaning. Wait for the speed of sound, then speak it out, which takes longer. We can have an insight every 30 seconds-ish. That's the time it takes to speak a meme from a flash of insight. Be consistently inconsistent. What prevents us from moving in a magically meaningful, synchronistic way? In the synchroverse, maybe we are not one as much as we are synchronized, thus not separate. To say that we are one is misleading. To say that we aren't separate is more coherent. Can we create synergy from being synchronized? Is this logical? Goes to, is this meaningful? Our meaning logic has been hijacked for programmed, contrived logic. Watch the reaction. Wait for the flash of meaning and the thunder sound of speech. We don't make playful meanings as we don't want to sound crazy. Crazy is equated with inconsistency. Someone can be an ass all the time and that's okay. But if a nice person is inconsistent and an ass, then they are crazy. No wonder we don't want to be interpreted as crazy. People like predictable, except when playing. Manic consciousness is a playful consciousness. Mania as leaps in meaning. There is no consistent meaning maker as the self, past, or the old. For better or for worse, new meanings are playing through us, and this creates new ways of seeing and being. What does this make possible for others? Our biggest psychological assumption is that there is a consistent self there, and thus we play out programs of consistency. We can make meaning out of life, our life energy, or we can repeat ones we've been given. The learning is making sure it's embodied, that it's visceral, as we cannot rely on the mind. It stops when the world kills our buzz. An excerpt from a book called A Current View of Client-Centered Therapy by Rogers, page 222. Quote, "In order for behavior to change, a change in perception must first occur." End quote. By the same token, if behavior changed, what change in perception occurred? And this happens in map consciousness. Our behaviors change, but we're not asked what changes in perceptions occurred. When the meaning merges with action, and the action is the meaning. This is for the millions of pharmaceuticalized mystics. I notice looking at flowers makes me feel better. It transports me into another world. Construction everywhere and the noise of that. Create an alternate universe for us. It's a world of psychological safety around perceptio diversity, where it's safe to see, be, and think differently. Computers came from LSD, from altered states. What is to be created from our altered states of so-called mania, of map consciousness and trance consciousness? Innovations in the ways of seeing, being, and doing. I don't know what my function is. I'm learning what we've been told to believe about ourselves through action. I invite you to participate in the transformation of insanity. I don't know what I'm talking about, though there's some kind of magic out there, or in here. See, say, and watch it come to fruition. Learning with the universe, I've paid my tuition. All of this is a memory problem. This is how I like to relate to myself. It can ripple out, but it doesn't depend on others. Having a strong dialogical relationship with myself affects the rest of my life. The element that adds meaning is either creative or old. Maybe just read my extrapolations into audio. Like a manic rap, encouraging memes for people with bipolar brains. Encouraging bipolar brains to do the same. Create a new language. Use medical language less. Information to communication. Replace the word myself, perhaps with oneself. Perception acts on the brain so we can see more is expansion. Belief acts on the brain so we see less, which is contraction. It's the cause of the fall. There is a different calculation that happens when we don't believe, which calculates a me, a believer. It's a calculation of a seer, a visionary, a believer to a seer. Seeing new is creativity, a change in perception that creates a creative behavior. Memory versus accessing the cloud. We believe in our brains as hard drives, and we don't have the RAM to access whatever is in the cloud. All my brain is devoted to accessing the cloud, not filled up only with personal memory. That's in the cloud too, but it's clouded out by everything else and has much less significance in that context in terms of what I can access. We are trying to have the best hard drives, not realizing we can access the cloud, speaking as files on a hard disk, or unlimited streaming from the cloud. It's a download of map to overlap the self, from overflow to overlap. The micro-expansion of learning doesn't leave room for an ego, a knower, but an awe, a flower, from ego to awe. Can we say awe instead of I know? Or flow? I see goes to eyes see. I don't know goes to wondering. I goes to eyes. Myself goes to eyes heart. There is no my that has a self, a ridiculous word. Me goes to E equals energy. Me, myself, goes to being. A language of learning, wondering being instead of knowing and meing. Vision reversal process, when there is no inside to look at. The ego is a program of a bunch of words spinning around that creates an epiphenomenon of a me. We don't do it. There isn't anything there doing it. It's just a momentum. The ego as the law of conservation of momentum and centripetal acceleration. Get something spinning around a center fast enough and it creates a line. This is what we think is inside. There is no inside. The ego is a foe inside, created by spinning thoughts. I believe goes to I perceive. If you didn't see it for yourself, don't say it. Ego is an inflation of the past. Creativity is expansion of the present. Adding meaning and richness to the present. What are we an agent of, an action of? Inflating the past, or expand creating with the present. Overflow, harvest, learn, embody. This isn't to change how you think about yourself, but that you think for yourself. State of mania, hyperperception, has become a trait. Harvest your creativity, your creative energy. Creative harvest wellness. Flow, energy, expand. Part of the embodiment is that it's not speaking as the me and my stories, but as a zoomed out perspective that can see all the mechanisms and talk about them to keep one from identifying with the mechanism. I am not that because I can see it and talk about it. There is nothing there. When talking about an illusion, we are one step closer to the real. This is part of the mechanism of hallucinating in all that we usually speak as is an illusion. When we expand in all direction, there is no direction. If we don't put energy into expanding the ego, the creative energy will break it. This is what happens in map consciousness, in trance consciousness. It breaks, and we feel lost in a meaningless world. We have no filters. We can see all the meaningless hurt. Creativity as an energy and ego as anti-energy, matter and antimatter. It's also anti what matters, which is energy and creativity. Creativity is energy which breaks up the ego in its wake. The ego is a dam that would limit it, but that energy leaks in through silent spaces, just as water finds vulnerabilities in the wall. Come down from a drug isn't the ego dying, but retaking the reins. Know when we need to contract. Don't identify at all. The identifier is memory. There is no self. There is something operating that expands and contracts energy. Map consciousness is like the ego holding its breath, on hold for as long as possible, trying to get it to die. But it's hard for it to die while we're still alive. We have to surrender the good of the ego too. How does one organize one's life as if one has a self knowing that you don't know? The universe is trying to destroy the ego as the primary operator in humans. Sometimes the body dies. The self isn't coherent with mapping unity. Our whole life convinces us that we are separate, and map shows us it's not true. Can others see us synchronizing? Are we synchronized? A transformation economy. Sell who we might become, from mental patient to what? For people who go into altered states without wanting to, it's important to do a bit of that every day when not in the state. Harvest input elements in daily life. Acknowledge that it was something important and meaningful. You fight stigma with micronutrients, as stigma is a result of the side effects of medications, weight gain, cognitive deficits. Self-dialogue changes your experience of it. The ego isn't creative, it's destructive. It's anti-creativity. Psychosis is the force of anti-creativity, the creative, expansive energy coming to an end, and the gravity of that. It's similar to the force of gravity. Creativity is an expansion of that and gives one a wider range of possibilities through perception and gesture. The ego is the limiting force of expansion creativity, which is a sharing. The placebo effect works as we need to heal in order to expand. And expansion heals. To be less concerned with ourselves. The gesture of the placebo makes us less concerned with ourselves. All the colors of the spectrum of humanity go crazy. It's okay to be that creative and without a self. Learn how to bring the self back in when absolutely necessary. Learn how to communicate on no selfhood. Instead of having the self as a controller, it's a tool. Mania changes your subjective experience of being a self-enclosed person to a relational agent of creative energy, not using energy to create a bubble around oneself, but a bubbling over. Transformation. Creativity pushes the ego out of the nervous system, no longer escaping the moment, but creating the moment. The inner butterfly effect. Escaping the pain, someone else has to deal with it. Terminate that terminology. We are people who think differently. There is more than one way to see it. Contribute to the language of making meaning for oneself in the moment. We go from being drones of the invisible curriculum to a blank slate disguised as our old selves. How can we be in disguise to others, knowing that the old identity isn't true, but respond to them as if it is? Medications can numb us from the constant sensory assault. Design selfless functionality. We need to understand how to function without a self. Cosmocognition. Our current language is inadequate. That's why we make up new words and new memes. It's one thing to go into altered states with drugs, but it's another to go into altered states, extraordinary states, without the help of any kind of drug. And then we would question everything that is so-called mental illness. We can't know that we have that potential inside of us. I argue for this potential. We have this potential without drugs. It is a world. The ego, the mechanism, cannot enter into this as its fluidification is required. No will can get us there. Mania is experiencing more of yourself. Mania takes us out of our conditioned worldview. Is dissociation just a discontinuity? A large divergence from one's current trajectory? It shatters the current ego-continuous reality, as it is not continuous. The brain needs individual brains to take an interest in it. The brain's first priority is the basic biological functioning until there is enough biomass of human beings. Then it needs to see meaning and pass that on. This happens when there is too much biomass. We have to walk to grow the brain cells of walking. We have to man-I see to grow brain cells of man-seeing. We have to embody in order to embody. We have to be conscious in order to be conscious. It's not just the steps you take, but the quality of them. That reality in life for real, instead of the state creating a sneak peek or a preview like mania. Can it become actuality? It's already actual. One needs the actual eyes to see it. The ego is the accumulation of not seeing and moving with the flow of life. We need more life affirming, from creating meaning to creation itself. Or does creating the meaning allow that to be attracted or unfolded by the nervous system? Does the nervous system unfold our understanding or lack thereof in terms of repetitive thought limitation? Where does the sun rise? Nowhere. It doesn't actually rise, but it's a convention of language, a description, based on our limited perception and perspective. Someone who has gone to outer space would describe it. We wouldn't say that they're crazy, but they have gone somewhere most don't. Why do some humans go to outer space? Because we are curious. So why do we go to the far reaches of the inner space of humanity? Because we are curious. We want insight, and we get it in map consciousness. Then we get diagnosed and drugged, lose actual insight, and then if we try to get it back, we are told we have no insight into our illness. Mania awakens the capacity of insight for direct perception. Don't reconnect to that reality. Reconnect to insight, to oneness and interconnection. Reality is incongruent with the whole human consciousness, how our nervous system is designed to create. Intelligence saves the body from thought with the handcuffs. We need to dissociate from thought, but the other operating system needs to come online. This is where we need safety. When we have more energy, we can share it with others. Be helpful in the spirit of. Meds make us have no energy to help or even solve our own problems, thus compound the problem. That state is giving us energy to solve problems, to create differently, to create change, and thus a different dimension in the brain. Keep on creating. You have to create yourself out of the me. Or you live as a result of the me, the conditioning. Life can be a conformance or a performance. Speak as that energy. The mental illness interpretation still keeps a me separate from that energy. Immuniverse. To make oneself immune to the old universe. The word why goes to I, E-Y-E. When we ask why, we aren't looking. Or the why, W-H-E-Y-E, is the why of our own seeing. Wander in consciousness. When the moment moves through us, it speaks through us. It can't happen when our thoughts are going on inside. It's not a clear screen to pass through. We run on the psychological energy of conflict and not the energy of perception and action in the moment. Life speaking words, not separating itself with words. The language we've learned has separated itself from the words that created it. We are either prophets or parrots. If life feels meaningless, can end life, which is the law of least action. Meaning creates action. Meaning creates a lot of reinforcement in the brain. It's interrelated. A meaning greater than oneself, an action greater than oneself would make. Running on the fuel of the moment, the spark of perception instead of thought. The ego as language in vulnerability, protecting the words we hold dear and identify with. When we identify, we can't amplify. Mental illness is actually contacting the order of dialogue. Word centricity to world centricity. If each one of us think different, energize, give voice to the energy in our eyes, things could be different. There is a field of memes, like gravity creates behavior. It creates human behavior, a field of consciousness, and each level is made up of memes based on that energy. Perceiving a higher energy creates new memes and behaviors. Am I perceiving this, beauty here now, or that, the past? If it's not something, energy, that can be called upon in the moment, what value is it? We can almost always move our body, extend a hand. Can you spend a day moving by what catches your eye? Perception, instead of being moved by the patterns and programs of thought. Some people are living in that all the time. Replace I think that with I wonder if. Life creates words. Words can't create life, but they destroy it. Most words are anti-life. This is our decomposer. To compose words or decompose ourselves with our words. We use thought to measure. We think we are the measuring instrument, the ruler. Thought is our ruler. Can we do things to get with the universe? The mitochondria in the eyes responding to light and meaning, making meaning out of light. We can't hold meaning in our hand, but meaning moves our hands. Meaning is a movement. It moves us. We can be operated upon by meaning. If we are not calling things into question, we are recalling things. Repeat. On location goes to on non-location. Thinking process to energy queen. Q is a symbol for what? E is for energy. E to the power of 2. QUE to the power of 2N. When I've said fusion, I mean nuclear fusion. It's because energy is folded up in space, and perception unfolds it and turns it into more energy of human action, words, gestures. This is how we don't kill ourselves with our thoughts, words, and actions. Must harvest the energy of perception action, creates more, where thought divides. What is the equation? Perception as a nuclear energetic fusion reaction. This is the language energetics of harvesting language from the moment, the mind we all share, instead of personal memory banks. The bank is the perceptual field, cultivating clarity of perception, the new human mind dimension capacity. Energy, thought, is fission of energy and divides it into thinker and thought. My why is, I don't know. When I really know nothing, the moment may gift me something to see and understand in a flash. Can we have tender consciousness? Tender consciousness, legal tender currency. Self-dialogue unfolds some of this tender consciousness. Consciousness as tender. I am a tender of consciousness, of the garden of consciousness. Tend the garden of consciousness. Map perception. Thinking is actually warp perception, war perception, conflict. Speak as, don't talk about. That speaking just speaks and makes stuff up like a child with a little more context. Speaking as, you can talk to yourself because it's new as it crosses your lips. It isn't preformed where then it can remain inside. This speaking only happening in the action of using one's voice. That uses the voice as its instrument instead of thought occupying inner space and drowning out the space where that voice collects itself before speaking. It's an unpremeditated art. Perceptual mimetics need new perceptions to create new memes to add to the thought sphere. Not all will perceive clearly. Society is the same memes on repetition. Can't derive meaning outside of it. Meaning is integration. It can integrate a lot of separate bits of information. Society is limited. Harvest memes from the unlimited. The perceptual field is the teacher, if you could only see and listen. Learning from one's own perceptions and observations. Energizing is when Gaia sings to our eyes and through our eyes. It's not thinking, it's insight. It's amplifying a perception, perhaps for others to see, creating energy instead of dividing energy with thought. Not time and space, but movement, perception, and communication. I'm employed by the universe. Gaia sings to me. Our parents are our parrots. Amplifier mode. The past doesn't have to be amplified because it's always repeating and has grooves in the brain. Perception has to get by these grooves and the sound of repetition. Thoughts are always raving while someone is talking. I'm seeing now goes to inciting, seeing as one is speaking, extrapolating an insight, more seeing created from what one is speaking. This can only happen if one hasn't preformed the next sentence. The sentence forms. Gaia forms instead of thought forms. Perception forms. Perception energetics. When we speak the moment mixed in with past associations, we can hallucinate because the past is not real, but our perceptions are switching to speaking from what we see. Therefore, if there is past thought, It can project a seen image in the mind, and the brain doesn't know the difference and thinks it's real. This is because the brain is much more in touch with the real, so when thoughts come in, they are seen as real. This is part of the transition of the evolution of perception, attention. Observation speaks. The brain is still harvesting memories when perception is trying to harvest the moment. Will perception win out, or will thoughts drag us back to the me, the separate self? We want to share our memories and not our perception. Perception takes vulnerability and not knowing. Knowing is saying no to what the moment is saying and wants to say through you. This is to show the creation process, to have hypothesis eyes that can make extrapolations and inferences and see what is implicit. See the implicit order makes it explicit. The self is a separation from reality. It's not the self separates itself from reality. How can the self separate itself? It is the separation. The questions, who and how, create separation. The abstractor is the abstraction. It creates a subject and an object, and the verb too. A movement to end the division creates the division as the movement is divisive. We ask how because we can't see. Seeing shows the way and produces the action. It's like a lock and key. We unlock the moment. Perception unlocks the moment. This is a type of signal translation and transcription that will actually change the DNA to see this more and amplify. There are signal amplification processes in the body and in Gaia. Gaia is our body. We are starting to map that. The Gaia code unlocks new codons in our DNA. Say Gaia instead of Gaia. Gaia sounds too much like Guy. Gay is better. Happy. I make meaning to hold oneself together. Meaning as resisting entropy. We have sense organs on the outside, but the brain is a make sense organ. They say the opposite of addiction is connection, but maybe the connection is meaningless. The brain's job is to make sense of things, not just through the sense organs, but our sense of meaning. When our sense of meaning becomes damaged by trauma and the brutality of society, or perhaps heightened as it's looking for new meaning, sometimes it has to create it in order to save the organism. Meaninglessness leads to suicide. Our sense of meaning is most important, or we become a danger to ourselves. When we sense the world is meaningless, or are adapted to its meaning, we move in the field of societal meaning based on programmed habit. Habit is a response to meaninglessness. If you can see meaning, you move in that field. In seeing new meaning, you are creating it, perhaps just subjectively, but people can sense it by the way you live. Maybe it's hard to break addiction and reconnect with society, as society is meaningless, and that is what led to the addiction in the first place. So before one tries to connect with someone addicted or someone in psychosis, think about what meanings you are offering them, and if that's meaningful to them. We are offered drugs and psychiatrists. That meaning offered through well-meaning connection is not what we want. We must make meaning out of psychosis, as it is a response to having one's meaning shattered, or the accumulated troubling meanings of an allostatic load over time. These meanings, these so-called meanings, make life not worth living. The brain wants to make sense out of psychosis, just as it makes sense out of a dream when it wakes up. Not only that, the dream itself is an attempt to make sense out of something by seeing new meanings in those symbols. Psychosis is the same way. It interjects symbolic elements into actual life for the brain to try to make sense of it. This is what the brain does, make sense of things. So in this way, it gives the brain something to do what it does best, to make sense of things, instead of attempt death. This making sense and making meaning process is imperative, and that's what you have been doing all this year, allowing the brain to do what it does best. The brain doesn't always get this correct, but even in regular consciousness, it doesn't. It makes sense of things with lies, but it lies that there is meaning in the game it has found itself in. Psychosis changes the game and turns on hypersense making of meaning. This is in response to the meaningless world. It's not that they are correct meanings, but if human beings were more in contact with meaning making, instead of taking on the meanings they were given, which quickly become meaningless, we could create a new world. Adaptation to meaning is habit, and habit led to addiction, when even those acceptable habits won't satisfy. Meaning goes to pleasure. Meaning is part of seeing. Society makes us blind. These dream elements during the day don't mean mental illness. They mean we have to create more meaning for ourselves and allow it to ripple out there, to change the way we live in the world. At this point, dreams aren't strong enough. Unfortunately, when we can't make meaning, we live a life in the meanings of the mental health system. If there are more occurrences, it just means you have to make more meaning. If the brain can see meaning, it looks for it. If the brain can't find it, it could create it to attempt to save the brain. People must see meanings beyond this society to create a good society. Is meaning the mode by which the spiritual or unmanifest can communicate to the brain to bring it into the manifest world? Meaning, when seen, is acted upon. Otherwise, one lives in habit, in old recycled meanings, which no longer have meaning. It's not that we adapt, but they are actually just not coherent. So the brain is seeking the coherence, not of meaning, but of seeing and acting. The meaning-making state is an intermediary to this. It's still not it. Anyone can retrospect all sorts of meaning, but to see and act is a different matter. It changes the quality of matter. Matter has a living quality. Meaning is the language of the spiritual world. We demystified it with our thoughts. Mystery. Street drugs make us feel hyper-meaning and hyper-sensation. The brain can create inner chemicals to accentuate meaning when necessary. If you can see meaning, you need no authority. Can one amplify meaning in interactions? Anxiety. One doesn't have enough mitochondria to do what one has to do to fix what one has to fix, which is what one sees. Too much seeing, not enough mitochondria. Mania. When one has the mitochondria and the perception, we run out of fuel. The universe puts us in ketosis. Need more mitochondria to process meaning because it requires action.